Danielle, and this is TMNT News. Thank you for joining us today. Today we have a special 4-part exclusive chronicling this week's 26th anniversary of the historic 1994 South African elections. To begin with, we'll turn to Artists United Against Apartheid contributor and E Street Band lead, Bruce Springsteen.
Thank you, April, for having me on today. As you know, I'm Bruce, the boss, Springsteen. And we're here to talk about an important thing today. We have the elections coming up here in South Africa after the end of apartheid. And there's been many things like this and that, but this is something really special we have going on here today. So before we get into that, it's important to get into the history of apartheid. It's important to know the history of the country that we are fighting for, that we've been putting ourselves out there for. Starting off here, just to let you know, South Africa was inhabited by nomadic tribes, the Khoikhoi and the San people, during the European Middle Ages. That's about the time that it was happening. Then Dutch colonists were coming in the 1600s, with companies like that Dutch East India Company and things like that. They became known as the Boers, and settlements began to pop up. Territorial pressures began to happen from this. The Boers and the Khoikhoi people were not getting along. There was inequality that the settlers were bringing, inequality that led to conflicts, ethnic conflicts, and the people of South Africa were vying for their independence. Discovery of diamonds and valuable metals led to even more conflicts during the 1800s. And this was further modernization, but also further discrimination between whites and blacks, which really can lead us into how all of this apartheid started. Thank you, April.
Thank you, Bruce. I even got out my own copy of 1985 Sun City, United Artists Against Apartheid, LP. Excited to meet you. Next, we'll turn to Sinead O'Connor for a look at the political scene in Africa. I'm sure she'll tear it up.
But nothing, I said nothing can take away this blues, 'cause nothing compares to you. It's been so lonely without you.
Thanks, April. It all started with Tiber generals becoming prime ministers seeking to unite Afrikaners, as the Bears came to be called. The National Party was founded in 1913. The African National Congress was formed in 1923, following unsuccessful attempts by black political leaders to gain equal rights. The National Party became increasingly nationalist during World War II. Afrikaners supported Nazi Germany rather than the British and the Allies. The National Party narrowly won the 1938 election and implemented apartheid. Apartheid, which literally meant apartness. The Population Registration Act of 1950 firmly classified people according to race, black, white, mixed, or Asian. The government established separate schools, universities, residential areas, and public facilities for each group, and required segregated employment. The government also required blacks to carry passes or identification papers, restricting movement. Thousands of non-whites died during 40 years of protests, boycotts, and demonstrations against these policies. All I have to say about apartheid is it's not really fair to do.
Wow, Sinead. Nothing compares to you. But I'm sure the Queen of Pop will get us into the groove with historical figures from the era and apartheid's impact on pop culture.
I am Madonna, the Queen of Pop. I'm here to talk a little bit about pop culture and historical figures. First is Stephen Biko. While attending medical school in 1969, Biko founded the South African Students' Organization to fight against apartheid and white minority rule. The movement promoted self-reliance and self-respect among blacks after centuries of white domination He also worked to unify liberation groups, including the ANC. Large numbers of supporters protested, participated in strikes, and marched. He was arrested and died in prison due to head injuries caused by jailers. Denzel Washington portrays Biko in the 1987 film Cry Freedom. The film was shot in Zimbabwe and Kenya due to the political turmoil caused by apartheid. Cry Freedom is also the title of the popular song written by South African-born Dave Matthews. Nelson Mandela is next. Mandela joined the ANC in 1944 and helped form the Youth League. Trained as a lawyer, he was arrested for treason in 1956 but found not guilty. The ANC was outlawed. However, Mandela renewed protests. He became commander-in-chief of the ANC's armed wing known as the Spear of the Nation. Mandela was again arrested and convicted of sabotage and conspiracy. He was sentenced to life in prison. Mandela was portrayed by Morgan Freeman in the 2009 film Invictus, also starring Matt Damon, depicting the 1995 Rugby World Cup Championship. Last one I will talk about today is Desmond Tutu. Tutu became an Anglican deacon in 1960 and was a prominent figure in the campaign against apartheid. He won the 1984 Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts and was elected Archbishop of Cape Town in 1986. Bishop Tutu is referenced at the end of the U2 song, Silver and Gold, written by lead singer Bono, criticizing apartheid in South Africa. The song appears on the 1985 Artists United Against Apartheid album, Sun City.
Finally, U2 frontman Bono will take us to that beautiful day, April 27th, 1994.
Thank you, April O'Neil. The politics of South Africa has moved in mysterious ways over the centuries of imperialist rule. But it's all right. It's all right. By the 1980s, performers such as Bruce and myself, we united to share with the worldwide audience the inhumanity resulting from 3 centuries of oppression. The greedy white holding on to the minority white Victorian rule for the love of money faced international boycotts, or reforming their racist, undemocratic apartheid policies. In 1990, the ANC was finally recognized as a legitimate voice for the majority of South Africans, and Nelson Mandela was released after almost 3 decades in prison for fighting against oppressive and brutal regime. What's second, April? Mandela urged diplomacy with President F.W. de Klerk. Within a year, the government had repealed the remaining laws upholding apartheid, and in September 1993, the legislature approved a multi-party executive council to develop a transitional constitution and restore democracy to South Africa. Elections were held from April 26th to 29th. The people climbed the highest mountains and ran through the fields for their chance for democracy. The ANC won the majority, and Nelson Mandela became president, officially sending apartheid and its white supremacist supporters to bloody hell. The chains of oppressors will no longer hold the people of South Africa down. They will be one, though not the same. Thank you, April. Back to you.
And that concludes our special report on the 1994 South African elections. For TMNT News, I'm April O'Neil.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to week 2 of History Makers Madness. I really do appreciate everybody weighing in last week. We'd love to see those numbers get even higher. We're trying to make this really fun for you all. So this week, I am taking a look at, I'm sticking with the villains, and I'm taking a look at Osama bin Laden versus Jim Jones. And I really encourage you to do some research before you pick your winner here. Mr. Hargrove, who are you going with this week?
Well, I am moving over into the artists section, and I'm going to be looking at the beats and the rocks, beat and rock. So Beethoven versus Norman Rockwell. I'm going to be a little selfish here. I did a project on Norman Rockwell a couple of years ago. I say a couple of years ago, I was in high school. But given the current circumstances and how Norman Rockwell was involved in sort of portraying American culture, he was both sort of progressive and ahead of his time. We'll see. I'm pulling for him. And Mr. Peterson, what do you got going?
For round 2, I'm looking at Plato against Martin Luther. Plato, the Greek philosopher, and Martin Luther, the German religious reformer responsible for kickstarting the Protestant Reformation. I'm going to call this the Thinker Throwdown. They both had some strengths. Plato taught about the beauty that you could find in art and life. Martin Luther confronted corruption in the Catholic Church, but they also had some weaknesses. Plato thought that humans were like birds, and he referred to people as featherless bipeds. And Luther was a little anti-Semitic in his later years. Mr. Adams, what are you looking at for round 2?
Yeah, so last week I was looking at space versus spice, Marco Polo versus the space explorer Neil Armstrong, and Polo was not spicy enough. He was not up there on the Buffalo Wild Wings chart, so he did not make the cut. So moving on to staying in the explorers category, but looking at Lewis and Clark, they were exploring westward and moving into more of the northwestern parts of the United States where spruce trees grow. So this week we're looking at space versus spruce. Mrs. Luce?
All right, I'm going to the explorers section as well, and I'm looking at Sally Ride versus Jacques Cousteau. Both explorers in their own right. Cousteau is the father of deep sea exploration and scuba diving as we know it, including the aqualung. Or will Sally Ride win out? She was the youngest American astronaut and the first female American astronaut to go into space. Her 2 space shuttle missions aboard the Challenger opened up a new frontier for opportunity for young girls with visions of space travel. One of them myself. I was definitely going to be an astronaut until all that math came into play. But so let's see who'll win. Thanks for joining us on this Monday.